Hey Maddox, what's up? Thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, hey Mitchell, nice to meet you. Nice
Yeah,
meeting you again. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. So, Maddox Locher, you are a recent alumni, Praxis apprenticeship program. You are well into a career, have had some early successes. Tell us a little bit more about sort of what you're doing now, and what the past year's been like.
Yeah, so right now I'm currently a inbound SDR at Maddox, so I'm in sales. So basically my day-to-day is like calling people on the phone. I actually manage the chatbot on the website too. So when people come in from like the front end, they get to like talk to me in the right-hand
Yeah,
corner. So if you've ever been on a website like that, you see, that pretty often. Um, but that's what I've been doing recently. But like over the past year, crazy growth. So like when I first started back in December working at Pandoc, I started as like an MDR. Well, at the very beginning, it was actually considered an LDR, which is a lead development representative.
okay,
Basically, what I did is just look at spreadsheets all day and organize information, contact information, and then we kind of like push that information over to the sales teams, and then
yep,
they would call those leads basically. So it's kind of interesting is like over the past year, I've grown from like managing the list to actually calling the list. So that's kind of like, the growth trajectory over the last year.
yeah, that's cool. What's your favorite part of your job?
I think my favorite part is just kind of like there's like a community to it. So I get to like talk to people who are doing the same thing. I get to get better at my job, better at speaking over the phone. And there's like a lot of like career growth in sales. So like
Hmm.
as you like hit your number every month, or if you're not hitting your number, you're always getting better. There's always something to do, something new to learn, which I find it, very interesting and very challenging. And I think when things are challenging, you're actually like learning and growing through that. So I think that's an important thing about sales that, kind of makes me, that's my favorite part about it, the challenge
Yeah.
of it.
That's awesome. Did you ever think that you would end up in sales, or even maybe you'll do something later down the road in your career? But did you ever feel like, hey, this is how I'm going to start my career?
When I first started, I never thought I would be doing sales.
Yeah.
I thought I'd be doing like something in IT. Because like in high school, when I was in my senior year, I was doing like the IT program.
Hmm.
So basically, I walked around the school and helped all the teachers fix projectors and computers, stuff like that. And I was more of like a introverted type.
Yeah.
So I made like this complete 180 from like being
Yeah.
introverted, the guy like read a bunch of books, to like from this nerd guy to being a nerdy but also a sales guy.
Yeah.
So complete 180. Never really thought I'd be where I am now, to be
Yeah.
honest.
Do you feel like some of that same natural curiosity and tech and probably some of the like contemplative analytical thinking that usually goes along with the introversion, like how has that been something that was a hurdle to overcome? Has it been something that contributed to your success? Where would you kind of mark that?
I would think it contributes to my success in some ways, and it was a hurdle.
Yeah.
So what that means is like, the very beginning, I had to get over myself and like just get out of my shell and start talking to
Hmm.
people. And then like because I was an analytical type, I would listen to my calls, really dig deep into like what I was doing, and then understand the framework of how the calls are actually structured. And by doing that, I kind of had this like scientific approach to sales, and then I
Yeah.
was able to get a lot better at it, get a lot better at my job very quickly, because I was able to sit down and just study
Yeah.
and do the work that maybe some other people are like more extroverted and just like do things hands on, where I'm like more contemplative. So I
Yeah.
think that can like aid in that. That one side of me kind of aided that process. Of course, like when I first started, it was difficult getting out of my shell and just doing
No
that.
doubt. It always
Obviously,
is. Yeah.
very nerve wracking.
It is nerve wracking, yeah. Especially if you're calling in and being told no quite a few times.
Oh yeah.
That's one of the biggest hurdles is building that confidence that comes from the reps and having a good process. So I want to rewind the clock a little bit though. What were you doing, before you started down this path of sales and before you started the Praxis apprenticeship program? Where were you at in sort of your own personal education career journey? What was it you were hoping to find? What were you looking for?
So like before Praxis,
Yeah.
yeah. So like before Praxis, I was thinking about college. My grandfather was always like, Maddox, you got to go into engineering
Yeah.
or something like that. Both my parents were in the Air Force, so I was like looking at that as well. Like, hey, I could take the ASVAB and get in there as
Hmm.
well. But then we saw Praxis. My mom was actually like the first one to see it. Isaac Morehouse was on the news, and then she saw him, and then she's like, Maddox, you should do this. And then I'm like, well, I'm 10th grade now, so we can like look at that later. And
Yeah.
like, once my senior year rolled around, we looked at college, we're like, wait a second, that's way too expensive. We're not doing that.
Yeah.
And then Praxis over here is like, wait a second, they're guaranteeing a job. We're gonna do that. So that's kind of what I did. That summer, I took like a gap summer. So for like about 5 months there, I actually like got out of school early because of like the whole COVID thing
Yeah.
and never got a graduation, like a real high school graduation. But like everything kind of, started growing a lot more from that once I joined Praxis and then leaped right into the program, kind of around like where I would have like started college basically. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like a, complete direct route college alternative. That's
Yeah.
kind of what I did there.
That's awesome. Did you have any work experience prior to the program?
Yeah, so I worked at Chick-fil-A for about my entire senior year. So I worked
Cool.
at Chick-fil-A for about a year. And then right before, actually in the midst of Praxis, right before it too, I was working at Cutco, which is
Mm-hmm.
actually like sales as well.
Yeah.
Very hardcore, like outbound salesy type where you build your own pipeline. Super difficult, very personal referral based. A lot of people call it like a pyramid scheme, but I learned a lot from that
It's
experience. Very
tough.
difficult. Yeah. And I succeeded in the beginning and then I burnt out after that.
Yeah.
But I kind of leveraged that experience to, get my next position at Pandadoc. So that kind of worked in my favor, just taking that leap. And I think Praxis really did push me to like do better in that thing as well. But I had like three things going on: Praxis, Chick-fil-A, Cutco, same
Yeah.
time. So
That
that kind of like dropped that off.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. The Cutco thing and really any kind of, especially like the door to door outbound sales experience, whether you want to do sales or not, it's such a great experience, even if it's not something you do very long, like going and getting those reps, dealing with rejection,
Yep.
practicing your pitch, all of those kind of things. There's a lot of translatable experience and like fundamentals you learn from that I think open up a lot of opportunities. So you're coming out of high school, you're
Mm-hmm.
doing an apprenticeship program rather than college. We know now, we have the the knowledge of how it worked out for you today. But outside of just the nuts and bolts of getting a job and starting your career in sales, what are some other things that you reflect back on, good, bad, ugly, about that experience that you're either proud of, you think you would have, could have been done differently, you would do differently, or anything else that you like to share about that experience?
So like on, when getting into that position.
Yeah,
So like,
once you're starting, coming out of high school, you're starting an apprenticeship program. Like over the past, year and a half, what are some things you're really proud of? What were some challenges of opting out of college and going to start your career? Were there, you know, big moments? Were there cool projects? Were there low moments? Tell us the good, bad, and ugly of it.
yeah, so like I think so let's like start with the bad part. So I think like when you first started doing it, everybody's like, "Oh, you're not going to college?
Hmm.
What are you doing?" And then, I once I get hired, I'm like, "Hey, everybody got hired." They're like, "Oh, it worked. You're
Yeah,
actually hired." Whoa. And then everyone's like turning their heads, like Maddox over here is like getting hired immediately at this cool position. But I think another part was like a low moment was, in the midst of my role at Panadoc, which is like, the MDR position where I'm just looking at spreadsheets all day, basically coming through leads, qualifying information. That was kind of a grind. And
yep,
it was a 10-month period of which I didn't really know I was getting promoted. So I think that grind period, some days could be like a low point, but I would
yeah,
always like remind myself, like, you have to like do that initial 10-month, well, it could be like you don't know how long it is.
yeah,
You have to do that period and kind of put yourself out there consistently. So that's what I did. Like during my position as an MDR, I would always like go to my manager and say, "Hey, I'm really interested in the sales position. I know that like the MDR position at Panadoc is a direct route to sales, and I'm looking forward to like getting on the phones. Like no hesitancy there, just willing to do it. It's that simple." So that willingness kind of like translated into them like realizing that, hey, the second we get an opening, Maddox is on the top of their list. I kind of kept me at the top of their mind in the hiring process. So that's kind of what I did. So you kind of have to remind yourself of that. The timeline's unknown. You don't know what's going to happen in there, but you have to like take little actions that kind of guarantee success in the long run. That's kind of what I did.
yeah. No,
Yeah.
that's awesome. So outside of work today, outside of the cool job, cool company, and kind of that continued career growth, are there other things outside of your day to day, from personally, professionally, things that you're excited about, projects you're tackling, things you're curious about that you're exploring on the side?
There's like a ton of stuff I do on the side.
Yeah.
There's a lot.
Well, give us a
Um,
few of them that you're excited about.
yeah, so ever since I started Praxis, like I got really inspired with like writing and just putting content out there. And I think the one thing that kind of hit home with me was the idea that you can just put a piece of content out there, it sits on the internet, and then people just come to it. And then the thing is, you're basically like you create an effort now in the present, and then that effort extends into the future for you don't know how long. But
Yep.
like by doing that, you kind of guarantees yourself success because you're leveraging permissionlessness leverage. Basically, that's like
Yeah.
a quote by Naval on Twitter.
Yeah.
I would definitely check him out. But um, if you think about it, in the past, the way you could like grow business and leverage your position in life was by getting consent from other people. But now we have technology, so you can use technology to do work while you're sleeping.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why I started blogging. Plus, I kind of like playing around with ideas. And when you do that, you kind of eventually you're going to stumble upon like a really good idea. And I've done that multiple times. A lot of people like read my stuff and like, oh, this is really good. There's also a lot of stuff that's not that great, but
Yeah.
that's that's kind of the process I went through.
Yeah.
And I kind of find it interesting just seeing what works, what doesn't, just putting it out there and seeing what happens. So
Yeah.
that's kind of stuff I do in my free time. I post on Medium. I have a Substack. Well, I had a Substack that like flunked, but then I just started one recently today, actually. And then that's been something I've been doing over the past year or so.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's a great experience. It'll be really valuable long term in your career, having that sort of body of work out there. So, wanna wrap this up with one kind of big question. So, knowing what you know now, reflecting on your experience, kind of all of it, the high points, the low points, the ugly parts.
Mhm.
What advice would you give to yourself or to someone else who may be kind of on that precipice? I'm coming out of high school. I'm thinking about what to do next. I'm considering college versus all my other options. Like, what advice would you give that person?
Don't be afraid to like own your education. So what I mean by that is like taking what you're interested in, going after it, and then trying to secure something out of it. Whether that be a job, an opportunity of some sort, and then kind of leveraging that opportunity as like social proof that you can actually do this. So
Yeah,
get your foot in the door, start doing it. It's like for me, if I wrote a blog post and then some guy reaches out and they're like, we want to publish this on our website. And I'm like, that's a huge opportunity. So yes, say yes to that immediately. And once you get your foot in the door, you just keep leveraging that from there on. And the earlier you start that, the more successful you're going to be in the long term. So the more you procrastinate and actually doing that stuff, leveraging your resources and who people see you as, then you're not going to succeed as fast.
yep,
It's going to look like an overnight success when you're like 25 and doing that, but you've been doing it since you're like 16 or something. It all just starts with the now. Just do that now. Just start putting yourself out there and creating yourself like a permanent footprint somewhere. That's the
yeah,
way I think about it.
yeah. That's awesome. That's great advice. So, thanks so much for joining us, Maddox. I'm excited
Yeah.
to share your experience with other people who are exploring their options. And have a great day if you're listening.